during COVID-19, we are lucky to have 4 of the faculty members who sat on that ad hoc committee, Dr. Stevenson Beck, Dr. Alan Denton, Dr. Aaron Gillum, and Dr. Chris Ray. So without further ado, I will turn it over to, I believe, Dr. Gillum.
Okay, can everyone hear me now? Sorry. Can you hear me? Okay, sorry. All right, so I'm going to do the first part of the presentation in which I'm just going to walk through the major pieces that were in the COVID accommodations document. First of all, if I'm kind of a little out of it, like I just was talking and I was muted, right? Like, I'm sorry, I got my COVID shot yesterday, and so I kind of feel like a pile of garbage right now. So I'm sort of limping through, but luckily we have my other colleagues from the committee here to help if I just am not able to answer something for some reason. So okay, so again, these are most of the accommodations. There were maybe some other specific ones that that I think Alan is going to get into talking to later. So I guess if people have, I can't see the screen. I don't know if people have questions. If you'd like to, Melissa, and Jenny, how do you want to handle that? Do you guys want to monitor the questions and just do them all at the end, or kind of just start talking and tell me what the questions are?
Yeah, I thought we could do the short presentation, and then we can take questions at the end, and I'm happy to moderate the chat for the panelists to make it go smoother.
Great. Okay, so I'll just go through the different pieces here. So the first is the timeline extension. So there was a timeline extension that the same committee recommended and was approved for the 2019 to 2020 year. This was an automatic extension. You could opt out of it. And so this would be an additional extension beyond the 19 to 21. So another one for the 20 to 21 academic year. Same thing, this applies to really pre-tenure faculty and associate professors who would be going up for promotion sometime in the future. It would just add 1 year to your clock, right? So for pre-tenure faculty, there's a set clock, and for some units, there's a a set period of time that you would go up for until you go up for full professor. So that would apply there as well. Again, an important point here is that faculty can opt out of this option if they want to, right? If they would prefer to go up under their original timeline, that's always an option. They just have to, tell, usually I would think their department head or their dean's office or something like that, that they don't want to opt into this because it is automatic otherwise. Okay, so adjustments to the PT&E criteria. Our recommendation was that there be some type of an adjustment to how people are assessed for promotion, tenure, and evaluation for not only last academic year and this academic year, but next academic year as well, right? Because we all know that the effects here are not, they don't just disappear because we all get shots, right? Like there's a lag to the impacts here. And so in terms of what that would look like in terms of adjusting PTE criteria, it could take 2 forms, and it's hard to really make very specific recommendations because there's a lot of variation. Every unit has their own set of PT&E criteria. But our recommendation was that, if the criteria has specific numbers, like you need to publish this number of papers or have this many grant dollars or something like that, that actually be modified in a different standard be used for those 3 years, right? So, so that might, that would look different with units in terms of if they would modify it or put a caveat in there add to their document saying, for these 3 years, this, a lower standard applies, right? If there's not specific language that's quantifiable, like number of papers, and there's just more generic wording, which I know a lot of documents have, like sustained excellence, well, PT&E committees and chairs and deans can reinterpret what they mean by that for these 3 years, right? I mean, sustained excellence in the time of pandemic is not necessarily what it was in the time before the pandemic, right? So, so we recommended that kind of adjustment to PT&E criteria. Course evaluations. So we've now accrued spring 20 when the pandemic started and fall 20. And because of the State Board of Higher Education has a requirement that faculty have to report at least once a year on their teaching performance through this, what's now called the SCES tool, our student evaluation tool, right? And so instead, it would be nice if we could just say, don't report any of these semesters that we've been dealing with COVID. In reality, you have to report one of the two, right? You can report both, but to meet this State Board of Higher Education requirement, you need to either report your spring 2020 numbers or your fall 2020 numbers. That said, as a general rule, we're trying to move away from completely relying on these evaluations. The new evaluations are better than the old ones. But there should also be, course evaluation should be considered formative feedback instead of summative feedback. And there should be an attempt to gather alternative forms of student input, right? So whether that's, maybe surveying students about how they felt the class was adapted and getting some feedback in that way, that's going to be more valuable than just having to report the numbers. Okay, position descriptions and workloads. The idea is that these should be, in some cases, retroactively adjusted for these semesters in which we've had the highest level of disruption, right? So spring 20 and then this academic year. And the idea is that these should represent accurate changes to the distribution of your effort through the categories, right? In most cases, for faculty that have sort of, in all three teaching, research, and service categories, this is probably going to be a shift from research and service more towards teaching, right? Because the time involved in committing to these the high flex model and adapting things on the go last spring meant that there was a lot more effort put into teaching. So I'll just show as an example, this was mine for fall 21 or fall 20. That this is the top row is my initial position description, and the modified, the second is what I had it modified to for that semester. Also noted in a separate bullet point for this in the document is that try to focus on a reduced service workload as well, as people are trying to maintain some semblance of a research program in the face of these greater teaching loads. Another recommendation was that there just be flexibility and support around teaching in terms of when you're teaching, where you're teaching, and within the high flex delivery, right? There's multiple ways that one can do high flex and being flexible within the high flex in terms of giving people, choosing what works best for them in their particular situation. Increased support for instructors. That can include actual support in terms of extra, graduate or undergraduate staff to help, as well as technology and library resources. Okay, documentation of impact. This is can take place at two levels. This first level, in terms of recommendation, was that department heads and PT&E committees actually craft a statement that's specific to their unit, right? That's talking about the impacts of COVID-19 on their faculty, okay? So this would be, again, not something that someone who's going up for promotion writes, but something that the PT&E or the chair write, that really explains how research in their field has been impacted by this by this. And so this is an example that Steve Beck wrote for the communications department. I think we have this available online potentially. This is just, a screenshot, but this is one potential template, a document that's just, again, a general document that's field specific, written by the chairs, heads, PT committees. The other is allowing for an optional COVID-19 statement to be added to the PT&E materials of applicants, okay? So if people going up, even for annual reviews too, right? And this allows individual faculty to explain how COVID-19 has impacted them. And this is, we thought was important, first that it be optional, that people don't have to put it in, but also that this allows a one-page space for people to explain the impacts, because everyone's impacts are so different, right? In terms of home life, work life, did this impact your research? Did it not? Things like that. And so this statement would be something that could be added specifically in regards to the PT&E applications as an additional one-page document. It doesn't replace a page of your statement of context. It's an addition to that. Two other points. First is salary raises. There was a recognition that in terms of salary increases for 2021, that, maybe this isn't the best year to be really pushing people on merit raises and things. I mean, individual units decide how they're going to do that, but it was encouraged to try to make things equitable because there are so many different conditions that can impact how people were affected by this pandemic. The other was a recognition that if you take these delays in your promotion, that you are ultimately losing money because you wouldn't have gotten your raise, and then there's cumulative effects throughout the rest of your career, right? And so there was a recommendation to, involve do some sort of retroactive component for those once they get promoted, that they somehow retroactively make up lost ground there. And I think that when we talked to the finance people and such, and others can comment if I'm wrong about this, but it seemed like it would be a lot easier for them to sort of retroactively do one bulk payment for like lost money in a year versus like try to reintegrate, like, what it would be if you got a 2.5% increase in this year and you were. So the idea is with some form of retroactive compensation for the fact that you went up late because of COVID, and that meant you lost money. Caregiver assistance, this was about, again, flexibility in terms of adjusting workloads, using the modified duties option, or even allowing faculty to take a leave of absence if their caregiving needs are such in the pandemic that it's interfering with their ability to do work, which is true, I think, most of the time. So graduate student support, it was a thing that our graduate students are also going through a very rough time now, and the recommendation here was that there be information given to faculty about how to mentor graduate students in this time and how best to support them, as well as to grant extensions for degree completion timelines. And then faculty networking and mentoring. This was the idea that, everybody's coping with how this pandemic has affected them personally in research, teaching, and service, and that we could establish networking and mentoring groups for faculty to talk to each other about how they've been impacted by this pandemic and how they can potentially navigate these career disruptions and sort of move on and do well in the future. Okay, so that's the end of my slides. So I think, Alan, you're up now.
Thanks, Erin.
Alan, just tell me when you want me to advance the slides and I'll advance them for you.
Thanks.
Okay?
Thanks, Erin. Thanks for that nice summary of the committee's recommendations. So I'm going to focus on one aspect of the recommendations, which is suggestions for implementation of promotion, tenure, and evaluation processes. So I condensed this into 3 slides for the sake of time. So I'm sure I have not hit every possible aspect, and we can have some discussion later, I hope. So I've broken it into two parts. So suggestions for candidates from perspective of a faculty member who's applying for promotion or tenure, and then suggestions for reviewers. So for candidates, I think an important thing to recognize and be aware of is that the automatic extensions for last year and this year should in no way raise the expectations for your performance. And that is baked into policy 352, which I'll get to shortly. So the intention of the tenure clock extensions are simply to allow you more time to meet the existing expectations. And secondly, you may opt out at any time. By default, you get these extensions, but you may opt out and return to the normal timeline at any time. So always keep that in mind. And also, you may choose to be evaluated under any newly adopted criteria. This is a point that I think is maybe not so widely realized across the campus. At least in my college, science and mathematics, there has been an implicit understanding that the tenure track faculty are evaluated based on the criteria in effect at the time of hiring. But in fact, a candidate can choose to be evaluated based on newly adopted criteria anytime before applying for tenure or promotion. So, and it's increasingly likely that criteria, so policies and criteria will be updated in response to COVID-19. And so as a candidate for promotion and tenure, you can choose to be evaluated under any newly adopted criteria. And then as Erin emphasized, it's important to, from the PT&E perspective, to document, all impacts of the pandemic on everything we do: research, teaching, service, outreach, extension. So not only over the past year, but over the coming years until you anticipate applying for promotion or tenure, because everybody knows the impacts are going to be long lasting. And so documenting, just means, as you would anyway for a promotion and tenure portfolio, be specific about impacts of the pandemic and how those how the pandemic has impacted your instruction, your advising duties, of course, your research and service, and just keep records as you would anyway for your portfolio, but be mindful especially of new things like announcements of conference cancellations, restrictions on travel, any information you've had that has restricted your access to what you would normally have to do your research, whether it's visiting archives, national labs for doing experiments, or materials that you need for your research, or applying for grants if programs have been restricted or canceled. And naturally, discuss any concerns you may have with your colleagues, your department colleagues, your chair or head, the PT&E committee in your unit and in your college, your dean, up to the provost. I see President Bresciani here, so right up the line. And keep in mind, everybody wants us to succeed, right? So your colleagues want you to succeed, and so if there's any misunderstanding about what expectations are, then those need to be clarified as soon as possible. Okay, I'll go on. Thanks, Erin. Next slide. So from the reviewer perspective, I think it's paramount that reviewers, so members of promotion, tenure, and evaluation committees, recognize and take into consideration the differential impacts of COVID-19 on specific groups. So there's increasing evidence that there are disproportionate impacts of the pandemic on women faculty, on Black, Indigenous, and other persons of color faculty. So imagine, for example, that you're the only woman or the only BIPOC faculty member in your department. Already you're feeling isolated in normal times. Add to that the isolation of a pandemic. and consider the impact that can have on activities, all activities. And then for all faculty, there may be restrictions on face-to-face activities. If you're in psychology, if you're in education, and you're used to having, in-person interviews, for example, and those haven't happened, it's had to be by Zoom maybe, then that's obviously impacting research. If you do field work or you visit our archives and those archives are closed, or you can't put on plays and concerts if you're in performing arts or other creative activities. So, there are numerous impacts that, the point is that there's not just one kind of impact that for everybody. So as a PT&E reviewer, you should, consider case by case what the impacts are. And the optional impact statement in the portfolio that Aaron mentioned, needs to be looked at very, very carefully if a candidate volunteers information. And then another element is that the definition of so excellence is often just equated to productivity. It's easy to measure excellence in terms of quantity, numbers of papers published, talks given, so citations. But especially at this time, I think it's important to keep in mind that productivity is just one measure of excellence and broader impact. And so as a PT&E reviewer, I think you just need to, to whatever extent policy allows, interpret criteria to really emphasize excellence and realize that productivity, however it's quantified, is just one aspect of excellence. Also, be very mindful, as usual, but increasingly now, of confidentiality and privacy. So, discussions within PT&E committees, should be kept confidential, and privacy of candidates respected, especially if candidates are volunteering, personal information about impacts of COVID-19 in their portfolios. Of course, we're an open record state, but nevertheless, there should be a certain barrier to achieving and obtaining records, and so we want to maintain a certain level of confidentiality, whatever we can. And then, because policies are in the process of changing and will continue to change over the next few years, I imagine, be sure that you and all the committee members are aware of any updates to policies. Make sure that you're applying the current criteria. And of course, the portfolio will contain the current PT&E policy. So be sure that you're not just remembering some old policy, but you're actually using the one that's in effect. And then discuss, within your committee, just how you're going to evaluate candidates' contributions, taking into account the impacts of the pandemic on all aspects of our work. And again, to emphasize, realize that any extensions on the tenure and promotion clock must not raise expectations. Next slide, please, Aaron. And just to follow up on that. So this is the last slide I have. In your evaluation of candidates, who have received the automatic extension, who have just not opted out, they by default received this extension, or up to 2 years. Make sure you read all PT&E policies, from the university policy 352 down to your college and unit policies. And already in policy 352, it's stated that there are extensions for probationary period for childbirth or adoption, personal illness or disability, or any institutional circumstances like Menard Hall collapses, or there's a flood or something and unanticipated. And so these COVID extensions are in addition to any of these already accepted extensions. So it's in principle, a candidate could have more than 2 years extension. And policy 352, explicitly states in section 3.6.6, granting of an extension does not increase expectations for performance. Okay, so that needs to be taken into account. And if you have like a specific number of publications required before, in 5 years, say, and somebody is applying for promotion in tenure after 7 years, then you don't increase that number. It's the same number because the extension is to allow candidates just more time to meet the bar, meet the expectations. And just finally, I know not all units and colleges do this. My college stopped doing it some years ago, but some do solicit external review letters, and so there should be in these letters an explicit statement of what the tenure extension means, so that external reviewers are aware that the extension does not raise expectations, but only allows candidates more time to meet expectations. So with that, I'll stop, and I think next up is Chris Ray, who will talk about just communication and some general considerations for communicating clearly.
Thank you, Alan. So at this point, if you have looked through the recommendations, you've heard the things that Aaron and Alan have talked about, you're going to realize there's 7 pages worth of recommendations in this document. Not all of them are going to apply to everybody, and every situation is going to be different. There were questions in the chat box. Changes to position descriptions, are they mandatory for everybody? No, they're not. And some of that is negotiating between individuals how this is going to work. And that requires a lot of communication moving forward. And so I wanted to spend a few minutes thinking about how to have these conversations, whether you are the faculty member who needs additional support, whether you're the supervisor, or whether you're even a peer talking through some of this. With that as a place to start, regardless of your role in the communication process, there are a few points that I wanted to make that apply to everybody in these conversations. The very first one is to make sure that these conversations are framed in equity. So the language that's behind the conversation should be about equity, and essentially recognize that the conversation is addressing an issue that equity is the root cause of this. Everybody has different experiences, and there are going to be disproportionate impacts based on those experiences. And with that, that's that second point, is everybody's situation and experience is unique. We know from some of the research that's already been happening, there are some individuals whose numbers of publications, whose quantity of research is skyrocketing right now because they have more flexibility. That is not the experience for the majority of people, and there are any level of experiences along the way. Some people might need workload adjustments. Some people might not need that, but they might need something else completely different. Next thing, regardless of what role you play, is recognize the anxieties that are behind the conversation. Whether you are a faculty member asking for support, whether you're an administrator, a department head or chair who is trying to provide that support, there are going to be some anxieties that I'm going to talk about in just a minute. The next thing I wanted to point out is accept the recommendations that the committee provided and the provost ultimately accepted as a starting point, but don't look at them as the end point. There are things that didn't make it into that document that might apply in individual situations. There are things in that document that may not apply to specific situations. So keep that in mind and be flexible as you go in terms of what's going to work. And the last general piece that I would like to say is keep in mind, as with everything related to equity in general, ensuring faculty success is the top priority here. We want to do whatever we can to ensure success for everybody involved. And with that, Erin, if you want to go to the next slide, I wanted to give some suggestions for communication from a faculty member standpoint. As a starting point for that, the kinds of anxiety that you as a faculty member may have, things like, will I be seen as less competent by asking for help? Will colleagues think I'm dropping the ball if I say I can't meet as often, or my schedule is changed so I can't meet during certain portions of the day because I'm helping with school, or those kinds of things. And that's part of what individual faculty members may be thinking. And so some of the kinds of communication and the perspectives you should have in the communication, first and foremost, think seriously about your needs. Think about the support that you need to be successful, the support that you need to maintain where you were, and maybe not even maintain, to make sufficient progress. What support do you need? Look at the recommendations that are in there. That may give you some ideas and things that you hadn't even thought about, and then speak up. And then let people know, especially your supervisor, your department head, chair, dean, et cetera, have a conversation with them about what you need. And don't feel bad about that, right? The next thing that I would say is focus on creating something good. And what I mean by that is essentially don't focus on the problem. Don't focus on the fact that COVID has made things really difficult, the fact that your schedule has changed, but instead focus on the solutions. Focus on the things that can come out of this. Focus on those things that can move you forward and help you be successful, because that's going to help that conversation go better. And one of the things we've already experienced with COVID is there are some things with COVID that actually might be positive results. So for example, in teaching, the high flex approach, there are a lot of good things that came out of that. We're all getting more comfortable with technology, things like that. Focus on those good things that can support you, not just now, but even long-term as well. And with that, also focus on the outcomes and not the process. The outcome, again, is faculty success. The outcome is, how do you make sure that you're moving forward in the way that you want to be successful? If you're pre-promotion, the outcome is, how do you get to promotion? To associate professor, etc. Focus on where you want to be and what the supports and resources are that are needed to get you there. When you are having the conversations with your peers, and these can be just as difficult, again, where your colleagues think you're dropping the ball, focus on the shared values that you have with your peers. And you can do this with your supervisor as well, but with shared values, most of us want to be successful in what we do. We understand that. We accept that. Most of us believe that our families come first. Most of us want a healthy balance, whatever that means, in the time between our life and our work. Most of us also seek to treat others as we want to be treated. So start with that. Frame your conversations in that as a way to create some similarities in your communication, in your understanding as you're having those conversations. And the other piece is, as I mentioned earlier, don't apologize. We're all in different situations. We all need different levels of supports. We need to be looking out for the things that we need. We need to be communicative with our colleagues and let them know what our limits and boundaries are. Absolutely, we don't need to apologize for doing that. And Erin, if you want to switch to the next slide. The next slide I have is a little bit of information for supervisors specifically. So department heads, chairs, deans who are on this call. Some of this also applies to other evaluators such as PT committee members as well. If you are in a supervisory or evaluative role, you too probably have some anxieties about this conversation, right? As a department head myself, one of the things that's always in the back of my mind is, will my faculty feel, and more importantly, will they be adequately supported? Part of that is, am I truly doing enough? And that's always going to be part of the anxiety behind this. But the other side of the anxiety of this is, how do I maintain fairness? How do I make sure that I am doing enough for everybody, but I'm not doing it in inequitable ways when I'm actually trying to promote equity, right? And so that's part of what a supervisor or evaluator is going to be thinking about. So with that, in that position, I would encourage you to be specifically aware of the power dynamics that are at play. Recognize fully that there are power situations here. Recognize that you are in a very different position as a supervisor than your faculty member is. Be well aware of that. Be very intentional about that. And that leads directly into the second piece of putting the faculty member you're talking to at ease. They're coming in with tensions and anxiety. They, in many cases, probably debated whether they should have the conversation at all. Do everything you can to make it a calm, relaxed conversation that puts them at ease so you can work toward a effective solution. The next piece of that, I saw Carol Hackerat is on here. Hack and I used to work with somebody who one of his favorite sayings was, if you need an answer now, the answer is no. And as an employee, that was always frustrating. But the point of that is, take time when you've had this conversation, take time to think about it. Take time to think about how the fairness plays out. Take time to think about, is it enough support? Is it the right support? Those kinds of things, and get back to them with an answer as quickly as you reasonably can. But that answer doesn't have to be right that second. Take the time to think about it. And the last thing that I would say for those who are in supervisory or evaluative roles, also see this as a developmental process and a developmental opportunity. Use this as an opportunity to talk to faculty, to see what they need for support, to see what they need, not just right now, but what are those things that faculty needed as support even before COVID that we had no idea about? What are those things we could have been doing better or we could have been doing differently? What are those things that can have a lasting impact on who we are as academic units, who we are as a university, promoting success for everybody in there? So those are the general thoughts that I had on communication. And with that, as we go into questions and answers for the committee and start scrolling back through some of the chat for some of that, Steve, I don't know if there was anything that you wanted to add or clarify to any of our points, especially on communication, but.
Oh, I think the panelists did a great job. I think it's important to remember that during the fall semester, we had a series of focus groups and found strong majority support for the recommendations we put forth. And we really wanted to include your viewpoints. And so this document, we think, really sets the standard to how can we be a support, and starts us in a good spot moving forward. We understand that it won't apply to everybody exactly the same way as has been mentioned, but we hope it's a good starting point. And I think we want to kind of think about who we are as NDSU. We consider this document to be helpful in terms of our identity as what the type of university we want to be, and we hope that that has been the case. I do think at this point, the panelists we've done a great job. I think it would be good to maybe turn to Melissa to help facilitate the question and answers at this point.
Sure, thank you. So
and the opportunity to document whatever they want to document and to open that up. But I also think from an evaluation level, I think it's important for the chairs to recognize what their role is in the evaluation process, given this list of difficult things, these challenging things that people are documented. We want chairs to know that this COVID-19 experience happened, to go in being flexible, being generous in terms of where that time allocation is. We don't want chairs going in there and factoring in a whole bunch of these different factors, right? We don't want them to be evaluating mental health or childcare or any of these things. We want them to know that we want it documented because we want faculty to have the opportunity to document it should they choose, right? We want that to be on their side. But from the evaluation process, we really don't want that to be some sort of mechanism that we use for that evaluation, right? It's documented for understanding and be able to adjust and such things, but chairs need to be able to evaluate and just kind of assume that, yes, we need to be flexible, assume, yes, we need to be accommodating, and that's not a justification for it. It's because we created this document and we can assume that.
Thank you.
There are 3 minutes left. Is there one final question? Otherwise, we can call it a day.
There is some talk in the chat about new faculty mentoring. I don't know if there's anything university level that you would want to highlight or promote that could be helpful for folks who are interested in that.
Anybody have anything to add in that regard? Mentorship opportunities? I'm not the person to answer that. I don't have the answer to that question.
So this was my comment. Actually, we are conducting a study about the new faculty who especially joined NDSU in last couple years. And we found this a common concern that a lack of mentorship is really problematic, and they are experiencing issues and difficulties with information, especially during COVID, because nobody is meeting and it's really hard to get that information. So I think thinking about when we are talking about support system, mentorship can be very helpful. That came up as a very common and main concern among many new faculty.
Thanks, Sarah.
Yeah, I was just going to say that I am. Oh, sorry. That I agree, and I think that I've been at NDSU for like 12 years, and in that time, there's really been ups and downs in terms of like mentoring programs, and like they seem to come and go, and sometimes they're at the college level, and sometimes they're at the university level, and so I agree that I think trying to find some like more consistent and then also maybe at a university level program, that if there was ever a time, now's the time. So that's a really good point.
Okay, well, it looks like we're at 1. Thank you so much to all who attended, and I hope you all have a fantastic spring break.